Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is the One Ring starter set for the One Ring 2nd edition by Free League Publishing. Before proceeding with this review, there are a few points I would like to establish. I am by no means what you may consider a J.R.R. Tolkien fanboy. I've tried no less than 5 times to read The Lord of the Rings and have become distracted, bored and disinterested each time, one time even fallen asleep mid-page. I've never played or read the first edition of the game, so I have no idea, or even if, it differs, and I love the movies, even parts of the Hobbit trilogy. I feel this puts me in the position of not having any kind of rose-coloured spectacles with regard to the setting, and it allows me to give it a fair appraisal, Tom Bombadil notwithstanding. Okay, first a bit of history. Originally released in 2011 by Cubicle 7, The One Ring was a beloved game for those who played it. Free League Publishing have since gained the license for the setting and held a hugely successful Kickstarter campaign in February 2021 that raised over $1.6 million, and it funded in around 4 minutes. The One Ring starter set is designed to introduce players to the new streamlined rules of this edition, as well as to allow them to adventure in Middle-earth. Right to the cover. Here we have a great piece by Martin Grip, which really captures the look and feel of Tolkien's world. To the inside. Here we have a set of One Ring dice, 2d12s that are marked with both Gandalf's rune and the Eye of Sauron. These are the feat dice, and there are 6d6 marked with the Elvish numeral for 1 on the 6 facing. These are the success dice. The reason for these will be explained later. Oh, and the number 11 is on each of the feat dice instead of the number 1, but we won't talk about that here. There are 30 war gear cards, and 6 double-sided journey roll and combat roll cards. A large reversible map with one side showing the Shire and the other Eriador. Eight double-sided pre-gen character sheets. A 28-page book of rules. A 56-page book detailing the Shire. And a 36-page book of adventures. Each of the 3 booklets have part of the One Ring to Rule Them All black speech poem in the Elven Tengwar script, with a stylised Eye of Sauron looking balefully at you from the centre. It has a real beauty in its simplicity. I think you would agree that there's a lot of bang for your buck. Incidentally, it is worth mentioning that the box itself contains a basic GM shield in the lid and a map of the Shire in the bottom. Though box lid GM shields are a thing I personally dislike, at least this one has been designed to stand horizontally and is deep enough to not fall over easily. So first up, let's look at Book 1, Rules. Opening up, we first have the prologue. This takes the form of a letter sent from Bilbo Baggins to Balin in the years following the events described in The Hobbit. Upon further investigation, I discovered that the One Ring 2nd edition is set in the year 2960, Twilight of the Third Age. It's a clever decision that puts it in a smart place where it doesn't interfere in coming events. After this, we have an example of play which, to be fair, is not very good, and a box out that details the events of the year, telling us that the One Ring itself currently lies dormant in Eriador with Bilbo Baggins. We then have a section called In the Shire. Here it talks about the player heroes and the lore master, the characters and the GM in any of the game. It talks about the aim of the One Ring being to give the players the feel of what it means to go adventuring in Middle-earth, and that players are invited to leave the Age of Information and take on the point of view of someone who really ventured further than a few miles from where they were born. We then have the structure of the game. It goes into how to have adventures, describing scenes and how the world reacts to what player heroes do, and then we move into action resolution. Essentially, rolling of dice should only be performed when there is a genuine risk of failure and consequence, and it breaks them down into 3 categories: danger, which is self-explanatory, i.e. the obtaining of information, and manipulation, how the characters influence those who are uncooperative. We then move on to the One Ring dice. Rolls will be mostly either skill-based or combat-based, but can also be for valour and wisdom to resist fear and sorcery. Abilities will have a numerical value which represents the number of dice rolled. A roll is made by using one of the feat dice and a number of success dice equal to the rating of the skill. On a normal roll, the numbers of these dice are added up with the aim of hitting a target number or TN. Equal or higher is a success. Usually a single roll is required, though the Loremaster may occasionally require a second roll. These rolls are affected by the feat dice. If the Gandalf rune is rolled, the action is an automatic success, even if the total wasn't enough to hit the TN. If the Eye of Sauron is rolled, it counts as a 0. The success dice numbers are outlined on 1 to 3 and solid on 4 to 6, with the Elvish number 1 on the 6 facing meaning a superior success. Target numbers are made against one of the 3 attributes, strength, heart and wits, and each TN is equal to 20 minus the corresponding attribute score. We then learn how to measure degree of success. The amount of Elvish number 1s that are rolled, i.e. on the number 6 facing, improves the outcome of a successful roll. If none are rolled, it's a normal success. If a single Elvish 1 is rolled, then it is a great success, and if 2 or more are rolled, then it's an extraordinary success. For example, a musician will produce an incredibly memorable or poignant performance. Die rolls can of course have modifiers. If a player has a special affinity for a task, then 2 feat dice are rolled and the best is kept. This can also be an ill-favoured roll which is based on the player hero limitations, and in this case 2 feat dice are rolled and the worst are kept. Essentially, advantage and disadvantage. Players can also have bonus success dice. These can be when something is performed under favourable circumstances or using a particularly beneficial talent. It's usually an extra 1 success die to add to the pool. Also, player heroes can spend their hope pool 1 point at a time to gain a single bonus success die to a roll. In addition to this, some circumstances can have the player heroes become inspired, which doubles the benefit of hope spent, so they gain 2 success dice if a hope point is used. Conversely, there can be circumstances where there are penalty success dice. Occasionally fortune will not favour player heroes, and they can lose 1 die or more depending on the circumstances to a minimum of 0. We also have conditions that can modify dice rolls. There is weary, which means that a roll of a 1 to 3 is considered 0. There's also the wounded condition. Anybody who remains active while wounded risks certain consequences, as illustrated in this table here. It then goes into the dice roll procedure, which is essentially a definition of what they want to achieve, selecting the appropriate ability based on the correct attribute TN, take the correct number of feat and success dice, gain or lose them depending on all of the previously mentioned conditions and modifiers, roll a dice and work out if the modifiers, feat rolls and the like are a success, and finally work out the number of Elven number 1s to determine the degree of success. The next section is called characteristics. It makes the point that all player heroes have traits and numbers that define them. The game has 3, strength, heart and wits. Strength represents everything physical about a character, from attractiveness to alertness to fitness. Heart measures the likes of emotion and empathy. Wits represents how smart, sensible or wise they are. TNs are created using these 3 attributes. Strength is used during attack rolls, heart is used for heart skill tests and when making a valour roll, and wits is used alongside the other wit skills when rolling for wisdom. Player heroes also have distinguishing features. These can be personality or physical traits that are designed to add more depth to role-playing, and players are encouraged to use these. If a player can justify using a distinguished feature in a skill roll, they're considered to be inspired. It does, however, have to be plausible. Almost all actions in the game are resolved using skills. Player heroes have a number of skills that are marked as favoured, which of course makes rolls on those skills favoured, as detailed earlier. Skills sit in 3 categories: strength, which is a measure of physical aptitude, which could manifest as skillful hands for crafting, clear singing voice, or even good sight and hearing. Heart skills are the player's force of spirit. This could manifest as being a bold leader, a gracious host, or even understanding the pain of another in order to heal them. Wit skills are essentially mental aptitude. This could be the likes of a witty conversation, solving riddles, or even the art of a burglar. Combat rolls are rolled in the same way as skill rolls, i.e. a feat die with a number of success dice based on the combat proficiency, with just the feat die being rolled if the skill is rank 0. We then have endurance, hope and parry. These are connected to the main attributes of the hero. Endurance and hope are vital resources to keep a player hero alive and motivated, with endurance being lost in strenuous activities and hope being spent by the player when limits need to be pushed. The parry score sets the TM for attack rolls against the player heroes. We then move on to skills. There are 18 available which cover a broad range of actions. They are, as you might expect, with the likes of athletics, healing and persuade, the usual fare, though there are a few notable exceptions. There is awe. This is used to measure the capacity of evoking respect and creating an impression, whether that be fear, wonder, or admiration. There is courtesy. This is the ability to recognise common forms of decency, conventions, and behaviour to enable a friendly footing with strangers. We have enhearten. This is used to instill positive feelings in others, usually by example. We have riddle. This is essentially what it says, the ability to extrapolate information from scraps using deduction, reasoning, and intuition. And finally, we have song. This is essentially the oral tradition of teaching about great deeds and misfortunes, reciting poems and playing instruments. Next, we arrive at combat proficiencies. There are essentially 4 weapon proficiencies: axes, bows, spears, and swords. Axes are the traditional weapons of dwarfs, including the great axe, long-hafted axe, and mattock. Bows include great bows. Spears include short, long, and great spears, and sword includes long and short versions. Brawling has its own set of rules listed here. We then have endurance and hope. These are the things that keep player heroes going when all seems lost. Endurance is lowered when they suffer harm, and there is a status called weary, which is what happens to them when their endurance becomes equal to or lower than their load, i.e. how much they can carry. When player heroes rest, they regain lost endurance points. A short rest is allowed once per day, and they gain a number of endurance points back equal to their strength. Wounded characters don't regain this. Prolonged rest allows the recovery of all lost endurance points, and wounds can be recovered as per the strength gain in a short rest. Hope is the player hero's reserve of positivity and fortitude, and can be spent to gain a hope bonus on any die roll as explained earlier. Those with 0 hope are spiritually drained and find it impossible to push themselves further. Hope is recovered after a prolonged rest, but just a single point, and an amount equal to their heart between adventures. After this is valour and wisdom. Valour is a measure of a player hero's courage, and wisdom is the trust that they place in their own judgment and self-confidence. Sometimes the Loremaster may ask for one of these rolls. The Valour TN is done using heart, and the Wisdom TN is done using wits. It then covers things like rewards and virtues, which are only on the pre-gens and not explained here. Player heroes can also have useful items, the likes of a hunting knife or flint and steel. It has to be non-combative. When using the respective useful item with a skill that would be aided by it, a +1 success die is added. The final chapter is adventuring. Here it explains the structure of how an adventure works, covering the introduction scenes and the end of session, and then it shifts to combat. Combat is done in a set order. Opening volleys, i.e. those with ranged weapons, go before close quarters combat. The first thing that is resolved is stance, which is what the player heroes choose individually, and then there is engagement, where combatants are paired with one or more opponents, and after that there is attack roll resolution. It mentions that the stance cards are included in the set as a way to illustrate the stance that is taken by each character. Stances are forward, open, defensive, and rearward, which only applies to ranged combat. The open stance has no advantages or disadvantages and can be used to rally comrades. Forward gains a +1 success die to hit, but attacks against them also gain that bonus, and the intimidate foe action can be used. Defensive means all close combat attacks against you lose 1 success die, but you also lose the same when attacking, and the protect companion task can be used. And finally, rearward heroes can only be attacked with and targeted by ranged weapons, and they can use the prepare shot task. Unfortunately, these combat tasks are not listed in any of the 3 books, nor the boxlet shield, which makes them kind of pointless for beginners. When engaging, player heroes must choose 1 or more opponents to engage with, and if all are taken, they must engage with an enemy another player hero is engaged with. This does not count for ranged combatants. If there are more enemies than heroes, then the Loremaster can decide if they stand back and attack with ranged weapons or whether they engage a player who is already in a stance. In actual combat, the player heroes go first, followed by enemies in close combat and then ranged attacks. Attacks are made using the combat proficiency that matches the weapon used. The attack rolls are based on their strength TN and modified by the parry rating of the enemy. All attack rolls made against the player heroes are equal to their target's parry score instead. If hit, damage is in the form of endurance loss and could possibly inflict special damage types based on the degree of success of the roll. Also, piercing blows cause longer lasting damage. Damage is an amount of endurance equal to the damage rating of the weapon used. Player heroes move to the weary state as they are wounded, falling unconscious when they reach 0. Enemies, on the other hand, do not become weary, but are eliminated when 0 endurance is hit. The Elvish number 1s on the success dice can trigger special damage results. If 1 is rolled, then that is a heavy blow, and it can increase per die that the icon is rolled on of strength rating in damage. Alternatively, the special result can be used to fend off blows and gain a +2 to parry on the next attack aimed at the player hero. If 1 Elven number 1 is rolled, then bows or spears can trigger piercing damage. Swords need 2 special rolls. One of these rolls can be spent to increase a feat die roll by +2, thus possibly enabling a piercing blow. Piercing blows themselves are triggered when a feat die is a 10 or more. The Gandalf rune automatically causes one. Those hit need to roll 1 feat die, as well as a number of success dice equal to the protection value of the armor worn. The TN of the roll equals the injury rating of the weapon used by the attacker. If this roll fails, then the target has taken a life-threatening wound. When player heroes are wounded for the first time, they tick the wound box on their character sheet and then slowly recover endurance as explained earlier. Those who are wounded a second time drop their endurance to 0 and fall unconscious. They are healed by recovering in between adventures, though the severity of a wound can be reduced with a healing roll. This reduces recovery time by 1 day, plus an additional day for each Elvish 1 rolled to a minimum of 1. Only 1 healing roll is allowed. It makes the point that the rules about serious injuries are designed in this book to evoke the mood of the Shire, that being it's not meant to be life-threatening. The hobbits are supposed to come home and spin their tails, not mourned. Finally, we have a list of things a player can do other than attack, and even, perish the thought, talking to the enemy. Okay, on to Book 2, The Shire. It's worth mentioning that the material contained within this book is exclusive to the starter set, and there are no plans of creating another game product with the same material for the One Ring 2nd edition. However, a scenario module entitled Shire Adventures will be available in the Lord of the Rings role-playing game with the same text but as a D&D 5th edition conversion. So it is just something to bear in mind going forward. Moving past the credits, we move on to Part 1, regarding the Shire. Here it gives a brief history of its formation after the hobbits petitioned the King of Men for their own land, and were granted leave of a verdant passage to cultivate as their own. They were led by the brothers Marcho and Blanco across the Brandywine, claiming the land up to the Far Downs, which is around 40 leagues west and 50 miles north to south. The original task was to maintain the Brandywine Bridge and the east-west road for the king, and one of them was granted the title of Thane in order to speak with authority, but despite this the Shire remained largely ignored and of no importance. Free to tend to their own lands, the hobbits thrived in the Shire. The first generation suffered in the plague 40 years after its founding, though they proved quite resilient. In the year 375, the days of the king were over, and the Shire became independent, a simple curiosity for those beyond its borders. The first Thane of the Shire was one of the Old Bucks, Booker of the Marish, who eventually crossed the Brandywine Bridge and formed the community of Buckland, which is now home to the Brandybuck family and Brandy Hall, which was founded by Gorhendad Oldbuck, who changed his family name to honour his new community in the year SR 740. In the same year, Tobold Hornblower discovered the art of cultivating and smoking pipeweed, an art still dutifully practised to this day. Isengrim Tuck started construction of the Great Smiles in Tuckborough in 1083, and it's thought that this is when the messenger service, created to carry news between communities, was formed. In 1147, a goblin horde led by Golfimble descended from Mount Graham and crossed the borders of North Farding, and Brandabaris Bullroarer Tuch took arms against the invaders and is said to have taken the goblin warlord's head off with a single swing of his club, which is renowned to have flown through the air and landed in a rabbit hole. This was said to be such an awe-inspiring sight that the entire goblin horde fled the field and the game of golf was invented. In 1158 the hobbits faced the long winter, a time when the land stayed cold and hard and the crops were destroyed by frost. Many hobbits died that year, however the rest endured and faced another called the Fell Winter of 1311. In this year the Brandywine River froze solid and dire winter wolves came from the north, entering East Farding. The horn call of Buckland was blown and the hobbits took arms against them to defend their lands. Though they were victorious, they suffered great losses, and it was at this time that Gandalf the Grey came to the aid of the Shire, an act that many believe was one that saved the place, though he is now seen as a troublemaker and disturber of the peace. Decades of peace followed, and the biggest trouble caused beyond that is that performed by Bilbo Baggins of Bag End, who has become the hobbit that trouble is usually attributed to. Gandalf seems to now come and go from the Shire when he feels like it, and is thought to be coaxing tweens and tucks into no end of trouble. We have a box out on the art of smoking. Started by the hobbits, it's become something that dwarves and wizards have now developed an appetite for, and started with Tobald Hornblower and his famous long-bottom leaf, which is still considered the finest smoke in all Middle-earth. It's thought that Tobald brought it back to the Shire from Bree and cultivated it on his farmland at South Farthing, and now variants flourish across the Shire. Pipecraft is something that is considered tradition and pride amongst hobbits, and takes many forms from simple clay affairs to elaborate artefacts. Hobbits are known to compete against each other in blowing smoke rings, and there are even rules contained here for those who wish to partake. Next up is the timeline of the Shire, beginning in the year 1 SR or Shire Reckoning, which is also the year 1601 TA or Third Age, with the establishing of the Shire by Marcho and Blanco right the way through all of the events I had discussed earlier to the current day of 1360 SR or 2960 TA. This is followed by another box out on the Hobbitry and Arms. This is essentially the militia of the Shire, which consists of the Watch and its 12 sheriffs, with 3 assigned to each of the 4 farthings. The sheriffs are easily spotted by the feather they wear in their cap, and led by the first sheriff, an honorific title bestowed on the mayor of Michel Delving, though with such little trouble happening here, the position of sheriff is almost a ceremonial one. There is a part of the Watch called the Bounders, who seek out mischief makers and outsiders in the Shire, and who are meant to make sure that they cause no trouble and report any they partake in. During recent times, the job of the Bounder has become busier, with more dwarves being seen around the Shire. Some blame Gandalf, while others blame Bilbo Baggins. After this we go on to families and culture. Ever since the fall of the North King, hobbits have lived generations in their own way, being thought of by outsiders as being slightly backward with no concern for the goings-on outside of the Shire. Hobbits appear to be mostly concerned with food and drink, though the Shire itself is the centre point of their pride. They all seem to know each other and are in some way related, something that they can recite from memory. Though they may complain, argue and fall out, they are bonded by kinship and never forget where they come from. They recall the great deeds of their ancestors as if they were their own, and are filled with pride when telling all who will listen about this. However, insults and damage are never forgotten unless amends are made, and rivalries can last for generations. Their shared genealogy lives in their collective memories, and the names of Marcho and Blanco are celebrated by all, though definite actual lineage to the founders has been lost to time. They're fond of tracing out the web of relations between the modern families like the Tooks, the Baggins, the Brandybuck and the Hornblowers, who all intermarried each other, and this leads to a fellowship not found in the other 3 people of Middle-earth. Their love of good food and drink stems from their desire to share it with loved ones. Parties are common in the Shire, as they are a thin excuse to enjoy good company. Hobbits often eat 6 meals per day, often not alone. The most common celebration is the birthday party, with the tradition being for the celebrant to give gifts to those attending. A common misconception about hobbits is that they are lazy. Though they enjoy their leisure time, a people doesn't master the likes of baking, brewing and cultivating livestock and crops by being lazy. These things are a labour of love for hobbits, as they see these things as a necessary activity to allow them to live the life they want to live. Hobbits often find deep sorrow when tragedy strikes, and if it's family, it cuts deep. They have little concern for affairs beyond their own borders. Dwarfs are considered greedy and dangerous, men loud and uncouth, and elves beyond their ability to understand, so with this in mind they tend to keep to themselves. Interlopers such as Gandalf the Grey appear to have an inquisitive, friendly curiosity toward hobbits, being particularly drawn to the Tooks and their cousins, being responsible in recent years for taking Bilbo Baggins on his adventures, returning with stories of trolls, gold and dragons. Perhaps the hobbits' greatest strength is that they are underestimated by other free folk. Some of them may indeed be fat and simple, however, history has told that they can be fierce and brave when the need arises. They have a love for all that is simple and remain strong together against anything that threatens their joyous way of life that they have made for themselves. We have a box out here on Gandalf the Grey. The wizard is known to come and go to the Shire as he seemingly sees fit, and is often greeted by hobbit children who at the sight of his cart and pony see it as a sign that mischief and fireworks are afoot. His visits will often take him to Bag End or Tuckland, though his reasons remain his own. He does, however, have his admirers. His fireworks are a sight to behold, and even his biggest detractors even secretly hope for his fantastic displays. After this we go into the geography of the Shire. The Shire consists of territories known as the Four Farthings, named after each point of the compass. Named after each point of the compass, they cover the entirety of the land granted to the hobbits, apart from Buckland, which was founded in 740 SR. The Shire has not really grown that much over the years, with many regarding Bucklanders as being no better than those hobbits who chose Bree as their home. At the centre of the Shire is the 3 Farthing Stone, as tall as 2 hobbits. It's not known who erected it, and it serves as a marker for the borders of West Farthing, East Farthing and South Farthing, and is held in great esteem by the hobbits here. Hobbit children can often be found climbing it, and it is said to be haunted at night by mournful spirits, though the keepers of the local inn, the Stone's Throw, are responsible for perpetuating these rumours, occasionally dressing in white sheets and wandering about it at night. The Brandywine River is simply known as the Water by the hobbits, and good fishing can be found along its banks. The East Road is said to run east to Bree and beyond and west to the Blue Mountains and the realm of the dwarfs. It's mostly a well-kept thoroughfare. Sometimes hobbits will try to walk the entire length of it, however, given the disposition of hobbits to take naps and eat often, it can sometimes take them 10 days or more. As it nears Brandywine, it flattens out, making it far easier to walk, and it isn't really dangerous beyond wildlife sniffing backpacks for food. There are a number of inns along the length of the road to ease the strain of travellers. Next, we have a section on hobbit walks. It gives some basic rules with regards to the kind of events that could happen to a hobbit, or indeed anybody wandering the Shire. This can range from being chased by dogs to meeting wandering wizards. This can fatigue player heroes, depending also on the season that the walk is performed in. On the opposite page, we have a nicely detailed map of the Shire showing all of the farthings. After this, we move on to West Farthing. Considered by most to be the most important of the 4 farthings, it runs west to east to the 3 Farthing Stone and north to south beyond Little Delving and into Tuckland. A land of rolling countryside, it is home of some of the most highly regarded hobbit families, such as the Tooks and the Whitefoots. It details the village of Bywater and the Green Dragon Inn, whose reputation was stained when Gandalf the Grey brought a group of dwarves there 20 years ago, with a local called Ruthie Overwater claiming she witnessed Bilbo Baggins being dragged away in a sack. It talks about Gamwich and Tyfield, where Andwise Andy Roper makes the finest rope in the Shire, something often considered dwarf work. It gives a potential encounter here whereupon a mob of angry hobbits have surrounded a building occupied by 3 dwarfs accused of stealing rope from the factory. This is followed by a selection of gossip from the Green Dragon Inn and Ivybush Inns where the players can meet Bilbo Baggins himself. It talks about Greenholme, a place where few bounders visit as the hobbits there are considered slightly strange. This is because of the mixing of fairy blood with hobbit blood, which has made them mischievous by nature, and some hobbits are known to have taken a fairy wife. We then shift focus to Hobbiton, possibly one of the oldest settlements of the Shire. The water runs straight through the middle of it. The hobbits here live in traditional smiles, and it contains Hobbit Hill, or simply the hill, from which the Shire can be seen for miles on the top of. It is a peaceful place full of flowers and the laughter of children. It also contains the famous, or perhaps infamous, Bag End. Originally owned by Bungo Baggins, it is considered lavish by Smile standards. It's been the home of Bilbo Baggins since, a hobbit that used to be regarded as respectable but has since become the topic of strange gossip and is a marked troublemaker. Bilbo is by all appearances a well-appointed hobbit who seems well off and is known for his generosity, possibly due to the legends of the hoard of gold, silver and trinkets that he allegedly stole from a dragon. Other than Gandalf the Grey and the occasional dwarf, nobody has been invited to Bag End for almost a decade. We have a box out here about Hamfast Gamgee. Known as a simple, decent hobbit, he has tended the gardens of Bag End for almost 20 years, indeed even keeping them respectable and tidy when Bilbo Baggins disappeared for over a year. He is fiercely loyal to Bilbo and will not hear anybody speak ill of him. There is a second box out regarding the secrets of Gerda Boffin. Living in the small community of Overhill, the residents here are known for their skill in mushroom picking, and Gerda has a reputation for finding a wealth of mushrooms and sells them to the Green Dragon Inn, where they make a soup called Boffin's Crock. Gerda keeps no gardens and journeys to Bindole Wood a few times per week to collect fresh mushrooms. It gives some rules on following her to find out her secret, and if she discovers them following her, she can lead them on a wild goose chase. Those who track her successfully can find her picking spot, a great hollowed-out tree that is hidden from sunlight and other foragers. She wants to keep this spot a secret and will go to great lengths to do so, though if discovered, and the player heroes give assurances that her secret is safe with them, she'll be friendly toward them. It touches upon Little Delving, a place where humble hobbits reside and livestock thrives. It contains a watchtower and beacon for the western border of the Shire that is now used to herd sheep during bad weather, and this is followed by the capital of the Shire, Michel Delving. Nestled in rolling countryside, it's a place of wealthy hobbits, and the mayor of the Shire, Pot Whitfoot, who has the largest hobbit hole outside of Bag End, the Town Hole. From here he manages the sheriffs and looks after the messenger service and quick post, as he is also the postmaster. Michel Delving is home to Madam House, essentially a museum of hobbit treasures known as Madams, such as a suit of fine silver mail gifted to Bilbo Baggins by a dwarf king, or so he says, and the first pipe used by Tobald Hornblower and the like. It's also known for its huge collection of cookbooks and family records. There are also maps that go all the way back to the time of Marcho and Blanco, or at least allegedly. Young troublesome hobbits often test their skills and try to find a devious way of stealing some madam from here. Also in Michel Delving there is a free fair around midsummer that lasts for about 3 days, 4 in leap year. Here the bounty of the Shire is shared and celebrated, with hobbits bringing their wares to sell. Stores of food and ale are retrieved from underground tunnels and consumed by attendees. Also, on a 7-yearly basis, a new mayor is elected at the free fair. Gandalf the Grey used to appear at the free fair where he displayed his fireworks during the Old Tuck's Midsummer's Eve parties, though he hasn't attended in the last 40 or so years since the Old Tuck passed away. We have a table here which concerns gossip surrounding Gandalf, ranging from him showing up to a small group of bounders claiming that the player heroes are in league with him. There is a box out concerning Mayor Pot Whipfoot. He considers the office very important and performs his mayoral duties impeccably, knowing that bringing the title any kind of controversy would bar him from many tables across the Shire. Though self-important in nature, he tends to try and avoid gossip and always report strange goings-on to the bounders. Next, it talks about the messenger service and the quick post. It is a known detail that hobbits like to stay in touch with one another and write lots of letters. This is delivered within the Shire by the messenger service and quick post. The first delivers letters and parcels to homes and businesses across the 4 Farthings, and the quick post is used for official business to deliver messages from the mayor or between sheriffs. There are post offices across the Shire, with the main one being in Michel Delving. It's worth noting that no post can reach Buckland, as letter carriers are wary of the eastern banks of the Brandywine. Serving as a postman is considered a position of respect in the Shire, and a blind eye is often turned when a sack of apples arrives slightly light or a box of cakes has one missing. We then move to Needlehole, a village to the north of the West Farthing. The hobbits here live in sturdy homes of wood and stone, and other hobbits find that there is something dwarfish about them, as they actually wear boots when hunting in the Rushock Bog. Needlehole is known for the pipes that the hobbits here craft from bog water. There is no bottle, a place where no more than 4 or 5 hobbit families live, generally keeping to themselves, quietly tending their land. It details Rushock Bog, a place where the River Vale becomes almost flat and turns into marshland. The air is thick with flies and gnats, and hobbits have no reason to venture here. The bog is a place of children's tales. Indeed, there is one of black creatures with large luminous eyes spotted crawling through the mud at night. Often dismissed as the imagination of young hobbits, some have started keeping watch for these strange creatures that have come to be known as bog beasts, though none have ever been captured. After this we shift focus to the Tuckland. The western range of the Green Hills in West Farthing have always been known as Tuckland, the ancestral home of the chief family of the Shire. Crops of barley are grown here and bees kept. Tooks are known to be slightly adventurous by hobbit standards, and it is a point of pride amongst some of the line. Gandalf receives a warm welcome whenever he journeys through Tuckland, and he is known as a good friend of the Old Tuck himself. Despite this quite unhobbity adventurous streak, they remain a highly respected clan. Within Tuckland is Tuckbank, a place with the smell of apples in the air and mushroom tents. It's much smaller than Tuckborough, and the residents here feel they are looked down upon, which could go some way in explaining why there isn't a road that connects the 2 communities. There's alleged to be an extensive network of tunnels under Tuckbank. Tuckborough itself is the largest village in Tuckland, and has more hobbit holes than the entire Shire. It's here that the Great Smile stands, a many-tunnelled mansion of the Tuck clan known as the Great Place of the Tucks, a maze of bedrooms, parlours, kitchens and dining halls. Within there is a large hall where Gerontius the Old Tuck spent most of his time and has not been touched in decades. His reading glasses sit next to his pipe exactly as he did the day he passed away. The Great Smiles is considered the seat of the Thainship, though this is more an honorific title these days. Fortinbras II has been the Thane for around 30 years now, and is known as a good and wise gentle hobbit. Following this is Waymeet, a crossroads along the East Road where hobbits meet to trade goods and gossip. Dwarfs crossing the Shire will sometimes stop at the Walking Party Tavern for a pint and to be told gossip by the shopkeepers here. There's a table here called A Day at Waymeet, which has events ranging from a chance encounter with Bilbo, Gandalf, Balin or the like, or even their pockets picked. It talks about the village of Whitwell, known for the sound of roosters and hens that wander about its farms. It's a hub of travel from Tuckland and is of course known for its roast chicken. The next section is the South Farthing. It's a sparsely populated land mostly made up of lonely farms and wide fields, and is known for the wine produced here as well as the most prestigious strains of pipeweed. There is Longbottom, which has houses made of wood and stone that are surrounded by fields growing the leaf that pipeweed is made from. The three most popular brands of pipeweed are made here: Longbottom Leaf, Old Toby and Southern Star. It's even rumoured the hobbits ship it all the way to Bree. Travellers tend to stop at the Sparrow's Rest, in which many rumours can be heard that includes encountering an elf to a wounded bounder showing up and claiming that he was attacked by the Black Wolf of Woody End. It details Pinkhope, another place where a handful of hobbits live quietly in modest smiles, though the place is renowned for its excellent vineyards. And we have Sarn Ford, a deserted place the hobbits tend to avoid due to the danger coming from heavy rains. Sarn Ford was the place of a terrible battle a long time ago that has left a mark upon the area that seems at odds to the general happy and cheerful nature of hobbits. It's watched over by men rangers called Hallis and Halbarad, who occasionally stay at the Sparrow's Rest to stock up on pipeweed and hear the latest rumours. Lastly, in this section we have the Shireborn River, a watercourse that flows from Green Hill Country. Next is the North Farthing. This is the only part of the Shire that doesn't have borders marked on the 3 farthing stone. It is known for the fresh fragrant air that cuts through the trees of the Bimbol Wood, and this area seems to be a bit cooler than the rest of the Shire. It details the Bimbol Wood, which is full of pines, junipers and yew trees, remaining evergreen. It's said to be dark and tangled in the centre. Hobbits speak of wolves hiding in the shadows. It talks about Greenfields, the place where Bandabar's bull-roarer Tuck drove back Golfimble and his goblin horde from Mount Graham. It is a vast, mostly flat land that lies between 2 rivers and a place where hobbit hunters stalk rabbits. There is Hardbottle, an incredibly remote village that the Bracegirdles come from. Despite this remoteness, the Bracegirdle family has risen in prominence. They are known to be outspoken, huge in girth and superior masons. There is Long Cleave, a place with a handful of houses and the home of the North Tucks, who claim to have descended from Brandabaris himself. A point that causes tension within Tuckland that is usually settled by drinking and playing conkers as well as games of golf. Also we have the North Moors that mark the northern borders of the Shire. It is a place of heavy snowfall and cautionary tales. There's also an encounter table included for the North Moors that ranges from the fortuitous find of a wanderer's campsite to an encounter with a wrathful spirit. It talks about Outbarton, a modest settlement surrounded by oat fields. The hobbits here live in stone houses, and when it snows, they like to reenact the Battle of Greenfield using snowballs. It has a huge cobblestone courtyard at its centre that is surrounded by granaries, barns and sheds, and is a gathering place for the farm workers to eat lunch. The oats produced here are used by brewers Shire-wide to make a bitter beer known as Dwarven Stout that travelling dwarves enjoy. After this we have East Farthing. This is the oldest of the 4 farthings and the first place the Shire was cultivated. Hobbits here tend to be of a heavier build and have more facial hair. It details the Brandywine. Running from Lake Evendim to the mouth of the sea, the Brandywine is the eastern border of the Shire, also acting essentially as the other side of the tracks for proper Shire hobbits to those that call Buckland their home. It's fished and traversed by boat, with the main crossing being Brandywine Bridge, also known as the Bridge of Stone Bows. It's wide and strong and also well kept, and nobody can remember when it was built. The other crossing is Huckleberry Ferry, which is 10 miles downriver. It's only serviced during the day, being left unattended at night. We have a box out here on Girdley Island, a narrow place around 2 miles in length that is covered in low shrubs and trees. It is unoccupied and a home of waterfowl and wild vegetation, though unknown to the hobbits. It's a secret refuge of the Rangers of the North, being a small fortification. We have a table that deals with random dwarfs on the road that can range from a merry merchant who gives the player hero as a gift to a cantankerous dwarf that accuses them of petty theft. We have Bridgefields, a long stretch of fertile land that extends west from Brandywine Bridge for about 3 leagues, and its most prominent village, Whitfurrows. This place sits at a crossroads and has trade from passing hobbits and dwarves, with even breeze hobbits appearing in recent times. There is also a northern community called Budgeford, which is the seat of the Bolger clan. We then have the village of Deep Hallow. The hobbits have a reputation here of being short-tempered and dour, and don't have as much fun as is normal for a hobbit. Indeed, these hobbits even lock their doors at night. Visitors are given a chilly reception. It then tells the tale of Forgotten Foxglove, one of a hobbit girl whose name has been forgotten over time, who was driven mad by sorrow after her family would not let her love a hobbit from Hayseed, and who wandered into the overborn marshes and was never seen again. Some say that she still lingers, singing a lament in order to lure her love or any other young hobbit enchanted by her voice. She is known as the Forgotten Foxglove, forever destined to wander the marshes, her face cast downwards. It then moves on to Frogmorton. This sits on the southern banks of the water and marks the halfway point of Hobbiton and Brandywine Bridge. It's known for a fine inn that is established here, the Floating Log, where people wish that the proprietor, Juniper Broadbent, would stop trying to make frogs' legs a tasty meal. We then have the hills of Shire, a range that rises along the border with North Farthing. Shire is the place where loads of iron ore were found and extracted. The number of tunnels dug under the hills is many. The hobbits in Shire are considered a bit dour and they barely venture into East Farthing. They seem to be very dwarfish in behaviour and they tend to be content with their own business. The township of Dealing has hobbits that are more open and friendly and are often more open towards strangers. We have a section on the Brockenbores. Though hobbits are natural tunnellers, some Brockenbore miners have begun to suffer from a coughing sickness and malaise that takes a few years of onset. Suspicious-minded hobbits think it's due to the greed of the Dealing hobbits driving them deeper than they should go, while others think that it's the skull of Gorfimble, the goblin, having slowly worked its way into the soil and poisoning the land, while still others simply think that it's an excuse to not have to do any work. There's been a decree that no hobbits should mine after dark and travel in pairs in the tunnels. Moving on, we come to the Marish, the home of the Oldbuck family. The Marish is a fenland which caused the first hobbits to live in houses due to the soggy ground of the region. It also gives brief detail on the tiny hamlet of Rushy, a place where the locals pride themselves on their harvest of cabbages and rhubarb. It then goes on to Pale Cold Lights. The hobbits in Rushy have been reluctant in recent times to journey into the marshes to look for bog-iron due to lights being seen that dance between the reeds and spirit away unwary hobbits never to return. Those exploring the swamps around Rushy may see the lights and be drawn away in a haze before suddenly becoming aware of their surrounds several hours later and overcome with an unnatural fear. The next up is the town of Stock, which is the busiest place in the Marish that can be easily reached from Tuckborough. It's a community that's full of life and has the best fish market in the Shire, and these are called Fresh Daily. It's also popular because of the Golden Perch Inn that is said to serve the best beer around and a magnificent plate of fish and chips. There is Willowy Bottom that sits on the southern edge of the East Farthing. It's populated by a handful of families and connected to the Deep Hollow. The hobbits here build simple wooden homes and rarely venture away from home. There is Woody End, a great forest of oaks, beeches and rowans populated by foxes, rabbits and many types of bird. It's a favourite place of picnics for hobbits and has a small population. Woody End also has Woodall, a small community of woodsmen, hunters and farmers where bilberry cake is a local delicacy. A famous pipe maker called Old Rosefield lives here and is said to carve the finest pipe in the Shire. They're rare and fetch a good price when on the market. He is also said to have a collection of pipes from various other parts of the world, such as dwarf-made ones and one crafted by a faraway wizard, and he will occasionally give one to someone who does him a particularly great service, as well as being generous to his friends. There is a box out called Things to Do in Stock. While perhaps not as famous as Michel Delving, Stock is a community where player heroes can find many things to do. They can enter fishing tournaments, trade stories with dwarf travellers, or even be tasked to travel to Bree. We then have a table for wandering elves. This ranges from a merry gathering of elves that will invite the hobbits to join them for the evening, to a sad elf wounded by sorrow which saps hope. After this it moves to the Yale, a lowland region north of Woody End. It's where the Boffin family came from and has no prominent village, just being dotted with farms and fields. It also details the Black Wolf of Woody End. Children of Yale are scared by the tale that if they don't behave they'll be taken to the Black Wolf of Woody End, and it's said to linger in the forest watching for missing children and snatching them away to make them its next meal. It's said to have fur the colour of midnight and red glowing eyes. Grown-ups know that this is just a fanciful tale, though in recent years those who've gone in search of elves in the woods at sunset have returned with tales of red eyes staring at them from the shadows. The hobbits of the Yale have called for a bounder to investigate the woods properly, though they may pass this task on to more adventurous hobbits to look into. After this we have Buckland. Unofficially the fifth farthing of the Shire, Buckland was founded 600 years ago, where Gorhendad Oldbuck decided that the Shire was getting just a bit too crowded for his liking, and crossed the Brandywine River to the edge of the Old Forest and set building the Smiles that are now known as Brandy Hall. Buckland has a reputation for strangeness, with river-swimming hobbits being talked about and legends of bitter trees that move beyond the high hay. It talks about Buckleberry and Brandy Hall. Buckleberry is a small, bustling village filled with brandy bucks that tend their chickens and grow crops, as well as fishing the Brandywine. At its centre, Buck Hill rises covered in grass and wildflowers, and it's where the Master of Buckland rules in Brandy Hall, which seems to be busy all year round. The hall itself has 3 large front doors and 100 windows, with each door fitted with a lock. We have Crick Hollow, a pleasant corner just north of Buckleberry, built by a young gentle hobbit called Rollo Boffin. His home was built just a bit too close to the high hay and old forest than is considered proper. There is a box out concerning Old Broadbelt, the current master of Buckland, otherwise known as Gorbadoc Brandybuck, and known for his large waistline and generous nature. He has good character and is thought of as a shrewd and stout patriarch for the last 50 years. He's kind to his own kin, even when his daughter Primula became engaged to Drogo Baggins. He's fond of recounting his adventurous youth, but is quick to mention that recklessness comes at a cost, and a sharp mind and keen eye are a necessity. Underneath that we have details on Haysend, a small village on the southern edge of High Hay that has the old forest almost at its doorstep. They are known here for their cold demeanour and seem to have a strange dislike for hobbits from Deep Hallow, whom they argue about fishing rights with. It goes into the disagreement between the hobbits of Deep Hallow and Hayseed here. They have agreed to hold a fishing competition, and whoever wins gains sole rights to fish in the Brandywine for a full year. The villagers will choose a fishing champion, and they will fish competitively from dawn till dusk, with the hobbit who pulls the most fish out of the water being considered the winner. Sadly, neither village trusts the other, so they're searching for judges, a role that the player heroes could find themselves in. We then have a table called Brandy Hall Balderdash, essentially table talk for those who have a meal at Brandy Hall. This ranges from talk of an elf maiden that lives in the Old Forest to a discussion about the cursed woods. After this we have Brereton. They are a small fishing community who are described as prodigious smokers with a fondness for rhymes and riddles. There's a table called Strange Songs, where the player heroes can hear tidbits of myths and legends alongside hobbit songs. This is followed by the High Hay, a thick hedge that runs the length of the border of Buckland to the east. Those who live in Buckland claim that the High Hay is the true border of the Shire, with 3 opening passageways through it. The hedge was allegedly planted by Gorhendad Oldbuck when he claimed the land, and stories tell that the trees rose up to revolt, leaning over the hedge and threatening to smash through it, enraged that they had a border enforced upon them. In response, the Buckland hobbits burned hundreds of trees, gaining them the hostility of the forest. The hobbits here are vigilant, and axe-wielding guards walk the hedge, planting seeds and cutting away at the vines that creep toward it. A few miles north of Bucklebury is Newbury, a recent addition to the region, even though nobody can remember when. The hobbits here tend to the hedge and often gather at the local inn, Hugo's Gruff, though it is generally poor quality to the usual fare in the Shire. Then there is Standelf, which sits south of the road from Bucklebury and was built around a quarry. The hobbits here do good trade with the hobbits in Rushy. This is followed by a table of a dinner at Hugo's Gruff. The kind of thing you could hear at a table in the inn, with gossip ranging from the water from the Withywindle aging people 100 years to the animals of the Old Forest being able to talk. The last section in this book is the Old Forest. Not considered part of the Shire, it borders the hedge and reaches the Barrow Downs. There are many tales surrounding the Old Forest, and it contains trees that were ancient before the founding of the Shire, and they are said to be malicious towards those who enter their domain. Particularly adventurous or foolish young hobbits will venture beyond the hedge to touch the closest trees, and even then only on bright summer days. The hobbits don't usually concern themselves too much thinking about the Old Forest. We have a table centred around strange encounters in the Old Forest, ranging from the low gentle voice of a maiden singing to a pack of wolves that hunt transgressors. The last section concerns the master, Tom Bombadil. He's described as a truly unknowable being who lives a simple, joyful existence of singing songs and gathering tokens of affection for his wife Goldberry. He always has a spring in his step and seems to speak in nonsense and riddles, and within the forest nothing will harm him. He is taller than a hobbit and clad in a blue jacket and yellow boots. He's very, very old and wise and cares nothing for what happens outside the Old Forest. If the player heroes should by chance have the opportunity to stay with him, they will find their hope restored and their hearts lifted. In addition to this, their beasts of burden or hounds will be blessed by Tom and given the ability to understand the verbal commands of their master, as well as being able to find their way back to Tom should they become lost in the Old Forest or Barrow Downs. Tom lives just beyond the Old Forest, and those invited to stay will be fed berries and honey that will help them sleep easily. The Withywindle is a small river that gently flows upland of the Barrow Downs and into the Brandywine. The river is said to belong to the River Daughter, with the odd water lily seen floating along being seen as a sign of her presence. It's said that if you listen closely, her singing can be heard, though nobody has ever seen her. This is actually the wife of Tom Bombadil, Goldberry. Golden haired with a dress of reeds and living flowers, she sings with the beauty of a summer rain. Lastly, we have Old Man Willow. This particularly ancient and twisted willow tree hangs over the Withywindle and has a fearsome reputation, and it is spoken of in hushed tones. Malice seems to radiate from its trunk, and is said to be as old as the earth beneath it. It is a hateful thing that seeks to harm hobbits or invaders of the forest. Its swaying leaves place a spell upon those witnessing them that makes them want to fall asleep under its boughs, where Old Man Willow can draw them into the soil and to his gnarled roots. Finally, we have the last book, The Adventures, The Conspiracy of the Red Book. Now, I'm not going to spoil them here, except to say that it contains 5 scenarios. A conspiracy most cracked, expert treasure hunters, most excellent fireworks, involuntary postman, and to soothe a savage beast. These are set around the year 2960 of the Third Age, though this is flexible. They can be played as a group of scenarios that are linked together by playing a conspiracy most cracked first, then the last two being involuntary postman and to soothe the savage beast, in that order. The other two can be played in either order in this case. The players are a group of hobbits that get up to various hobbity kinds of trouble due to the patronage of a particularly renowned troublemaker in the Shire. The One Ring 2nd edition starter set is a piece of work of many highs and one or two niggling lows. Firstly, let's talk about the quality. As could be expected from Free League Publishing, the set itself is a lovely thing that really evokes the works of Tolkien in every way, from the elvish script, the pencilled artwork, the occasional surprise double spread of a key scene from the novels that are at times achingly beautiful, and an essentially unquantifiable feeling that you get from reading the book that it's been done properly. Also, its layout is pleasing to the eye, with lots of white space to break up long passages. A lot of thought and concern has clearly gone into the design here. The fact that it's spread nicely over 3 books allows players to read the rules and the like, without ever having the concern nor temptation to read the Shire or the scenarios. The maps throughout are beautiful, detailed and very much fitting to the game, though there is the odd piece of art that's reused in the set, which is disappointing given how much money the Kickstarter raised. The first book has its ups and downs, with a fairly poor example of play and rules that I feel are light on explanation. However, the rules that are present really feel like Tolkien's work, with the continuing themes of hope, valour, and a sense of lived-in history. What is also commendable is the attempt to steer away from the murder hobo side of role-playing, and to instead evoke a sense of heroism and being able to go beyond what a player hero believes are their limits. The mechanics, while not expansive, really fit the spirit of the game, with a kind of inspiration system and the use of hope to influence die rolls, and the use of derived numbers to attain results is a quite modern approach which puts the fate of the hero in the player's hands, for the most part. The book on the Shire is simply fantastic to read and genuinely feels like it could have been written by a hobbit, with the constant references to the troublemakers Gandalf the Grey and Bilbo Baggins, as well as the general description of hobbits being kind, gentle folk who enjoy the simple pleasures in life. It really brings the Shire to life for me, which is definitely to be commended. One thing that was severely lacking here was that none of the books had content pages or indexes, and at a real push, the book on the Shire at least should have had one of these. The Book of Scenarios is completely fitting with the idea that the player heroes are adventuring in the Shire, and I've heard them described as cosy adventures, which really is an appropriate way of summing them up. From a collector's standpoint, the set is a must-have, given the comprehensive treatment that the Shire receives here, though from a playing perspective I do feel in some ways that this is also a reason that some people may be put off by the starter set. The guest appearance of Balin aside, the players only get to play hobbits, and the scenarios are only geared towards this, and let's be honest, hobbits are just not to everyone's taste. There are no more dwarves, no elves or men here, just hobbits. I've thought about this a lot and come to the conclusion that the best example I can give is that if you heard about a top restaurant and booked a table to try out the taster menu to see if you might like the food there, but are only given one beautiful meal. Some people may enjoy that meal and go back, whereas others may have the feeling that this isn't what they were expecting. That's what the starter set feels like to me. You're given one beautiful meal consisting of the adventures of the hobbits in the Shire, however there's so much more to do in Middle-earth, and you don't even get a taste of that. Don't misunderstand me, I appreciate why they've done it this way, to show the hobbits that there is a world that exists beyond the Shire, but not everybody will want nor expect that. The box set itself has the occasional niggle too. One thing that I did find disappointing was the combat stance cards. They contain the actions that can be performed on stances, and though these actions are mentioned in the rulebook, they are not explained anywhere in the starter set. You have to, I imagine, buy the full rulebook to find out what the in-game effect is. While I understand that this is a teaser for things you can do, it probably would have only taken a page to explain and to make the product entirely self-contained. In addition to this, there's nothing here to convince you to pick up the full system. It just kind of ends at the culmination of the scenarios. Listening to what I've said so far, you may be under the impression that I have mixed feelings about the One Ring 2nd edition starter set, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I think it's a work of beauty, love and pride, and it genuinely makes you feel like you are playing a hobbit in Middle-earth. Not an easy task to accomplish. When I spoke to my own gaming group about it, they all agreed that it sounds fantastic and they really want to play the hobbits in the Shire, so I'm committed at some point in the future to running the adventures for them. Something that will be a welcome change from the usual dungeon crawling and experience point chasing that I'm used to. It's become a trend recently to include something in the starter set that's not contained anywhere else. The RuneQuest starter set has Johnstown. The Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set has Ubersreich, and I'm glad to see that the One Ring 2nd edition starter set has followed suit in this regard. I believe that whether you're a fan of Tolkien's work or not, you'll find something to like here. For those who are fans of it, they'll find a fairly unique immersion into Middle-earth, while those who are not will be greeted with a fairly robust system that bucks the norms set by games such as D&D by giving the lives of the player heroes a sense of meaning beyond armour classes and treasure hunting. I give the One Ring 2nd edition starter set a 9 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos, as well as give me a hey doll, merry doll, ring-a-dong dillo, ring-a-dong hop-along, fal-al the willow in the comments. Also, if you're interested in buying this product, I've put some links below. Lastly, if you like what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon, or even becoming a member of my YouTube channel. Bud out.